Okay, this one's just for fun. So a while back, do you know Vinegar Syndrome? I love Vinegar Syndrome. Actually, I have friends who work at Vinegar Syndrome. Vinegar Syndrome is this company out of Connecticut that is the Blu-ray company. They have an insane film library. They acquire titles all the time, and they do great restorations and releases of really obscure stuff. They started off doing just adult films, then they sort of branched into horror and cult and exploitation, and now they're like licensing things from the major studios. They just announced Showgirls. They put out Roadhouse. They put out Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. So they've done all kinds of stuff. It generally keeps to the theme of kind of weird and obscure cult stuff, but sometimes they branch out a bit farther. And what they have sublabels. Told you that story to tell you this one. They have what they call their sublabels, and those sublabels are numerous that they release. So it wouldn't necessarily say Vinegar Syndrome on there, but they're produced and manufactured and restored, and they work with Vinegar Syndrome in getting these out. And one of those sublabels is AGFA, the American Genre Film Archive out of Austin. This was a company that for the longest time was attached to Mondo and the Alamo Drafthouse, and they started as this gigantic film archive for, again, horror, cult, exploitation, drive-in kind of movies to preserve them and rent them out for theaters and give them video releases and generally make sure they're not lost. They have partnered up with, I'm going to just keep naming labels, they have partnered up with Something Weird Video, the iconic Seattle-based home video label that's been around since the 80s or late 80s, releasing horror, cult, exploitation, Eurotrash, sleaze movies on video. They started off with Mike Rainey as videotapes, and they branched into DVDs and then Blu-rays, and now they're working with AGFA to produce fine titles like this. This is The Monster of Camp Sunshine. This is a nudist film. Yes, that was a genre if you didn't know. Nudist camp movies. It was a way for people to legally make films that had nudity in them, but you can say, no, this is just documentary about a lifestyle. This is educational. It's a wonderful and kind of hilarious history. So I picked this disc up. So this is one I just bought for myself because I'd always heard about this movie. And frankly, Vinegar Syndrome was having a hell of a sale. So what you get with this package from Something Weird and AGFA, and two companies I dearly love. I may not say great things about all the releases, but I will never not say a kind word about AGFA and Something Weird. So you get a special slipcase for this. If you know Vinegar Syndrome, they do a lot of slip covers. They become very sought after, very valuable once they go out of print for the collectors. So you get the slipcase on the front, and it looks like an old ad from a 60s monster magazine, and on the back it looks like an ad from a 60s monster or comic book, and all having humorously written and having to do with the films. And then you slip out the case and you have, there's no nudity on here, right? Good. You have the actual cover, and this is actually 3 movies. This is Adults Only Volume 2, number 36. Now we say adults only. This is so barely salacious. For its day it was, but for now, not at all. And it's 3 films. It is The Monster of Camp Sunshine from 1964. It's black and white. It's 74 minutes. Honeymoon of Terror from 1961, black and white. That is 62 minutes. You see, in the old days, features didn't have to be 3 hours long. And in the old days, double features were a thing. So a lot of times the B feature didn't have to be that long. If you think about the old Bowery Boys movies, those were not much more than an hour. A lot of the early Russ Meyer movies were not much more than an hour. And there's a third feature on here called All Men Are Apes from 1965, and that's 63 minutes. And that came from an SVHS master for Something Weird, which a lot of their stuff was done as SVHS masters. I don't know if the original materials even exist for some of these things, and that's why you see them as SVHS. It looks fine. It looks as good as the best Something Weird tape would have looked. I watched it on a pretty big 4K TV, and it looked okay. It looked fine to me. It didn't look as good as the other 2 features, which looked astoundingly good considering what they are. The fact that the negatives or even a print of these films has survived this long, these disreputable, oftentimes orphan films have survived this long, looking stunning. Monster of Camp Sunshine looks so good, and Honeymoon of Terror looks pretty darn good too. So what are these films? They're ridiculous, is what these films are. So Monster of Camp Sunshine, it's docudrama, sure, horror comedy about a model in New York and her model friend who decides to go to a nudist camp, the titular Camp Sunshine, and the dim-witted brother of the owner is drinking water, polluted water from a river, and it turns him into a monster, a beast, who just kind of shuffles around a lot. There's not a lot of nudity, surprisingly, in this nudist camp film. A lot of back ends, shall we say. Some front ends, some back ends, and a lot of very careful turning around to cover lower frontal areas of people, which is pretty funny. It's done with a sense of humor. It's barely, not much more than an hour. It gets very funny, very, as it says on the box cover, very Pythonic at the end of that film. And to me, the greatest value was not its salaciousness, not its creature, although that was funny. It was seeing glimpses of New York City in 1964 looking perfect. And these weren't sets. These were apartments. These were streets. To see, and I say this is like one of the greatest gifts the digital HD 4K era has given me, is signage. And being able to freeze frame and reading all the signs, reading the street signs, reading the store signs, reading the reading material that's sitting down in somebody's living room. It really, because it's not set decoration. They didn't go and recreate a 1964 magazine cover. They just grabbed what they had laying around. So it's an amazing snapshot of the era and of the social mores and all that kind of stuff. So Monster of Camp Sunshine, not a good film by any means, but entertaining and goofy, if you like the kind of entertaining and goofy stuff I have. And if that was the only thing on this Blu-ray, I think you'd find a lot of used copies of this Blu-ray, but it also has Honeymoon of Terror, which is interesting. It's a Dan Sunny. If you know Dan Sunny, he was one of the old great exploitation pioneers in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And basically it's a newlywed couple, and I don't even remember the entire story because there's so little of it, but they go to, I believe, Las Vegas, so you get to see some like vintage Vegas exteriors, and they get married, and they're going to go on a honeymoon on this island, and for some reason the wife and husband get separated. He's going to catch up with her, and she's sunning herself, and some leering old creep ship's captain or some seafarer and some swabby is there, and he's after her. So it becomes a chase, and not really explicit or anything, but he like attacks her, and he wants to get him some of that, I used to say in the old days. So it's a thriller, basically, roughy thriller. Again, barely an hour. Not a lot to it, but interesting to see, to me. As a fan, and scholar is a very pompous word. As a fan, as a historian, as somebody who likes to learn about all segments of film culture, especially the goofy stuff, it was really interesting to see. I'd never heard of it. And then the last film, All Men Are Apes, is probably the best film on here. This is, I'm a little hazy on the storyline, but a woman whose sister is a stripper goes and decides to go into that lifestyle and winds up getting hooked up with some sleazy manager who wants her to do an act with a gorilla that he happens to have. It's a guy in a gorilla suit. It's a guy in a terrible gorilla suit, which makes it great. And at one point, there's a different woman singing a torch song in a nightclub, a very sultry, emotional torch song, and they just cut to footage of a chimp eating ice cream, and they cut back, no explanation. I had to rewind it and laugh at it a couple times. It was amazing. These films were done with a sense of humor. It's not that these people were dumb and didn't know how to make movies. It's they didn't have the means to make anything grand, or didn't feel like making anything grand, or saw that there was cash in this kind of thing, and they did that. So All Men Are Apes has a great theme song, and it's basically saying, title kind of says it all, doesn't it? And it's multiple locations. The acting is actually pretty good. Our lead is actually quite good. I was surprised. I don't know if she did anything else. And it's got some gorilla action. At some point, the gorilla goes on a rampage, which is wonderful, and breaks through a wall, which I always appreciate a gorilla. Any film, if you've not seen a lot of these ramblings that I do, I agree with the makers of American Pie, who said on the commentary for that film on DVD, everything's better with a monkey. I believe everything's better with a monkey or a gorilla. And if it's a guy in a gorilla or a monkey suit, I don't mean a tux, I'm okay with that. That's okay. In some ways, it's even better. So this disc is really something special. It also has about 20 minutes or so of trailers from the Something Weird vault for other sexploitation movies, just wacky, wild stuff, as Carson would say. And it's 200 minutes. It's a 200-minute disc. So you get your money's worth with this Monster from Camp Sunshine disc, and it's all region. So if you're watching this review in Bratislavia and you're like, I need me some Camp Sunshine, it will play in your Blu-ray player. So available from while supplies last. Their stuff does go out of print. So unlike a lot of major releases, if you like Vinegar Syndrome stuff or from any of these cult boutique labels that I talk about, you really probably want to get these while you can, because especially Vinegar Syndrome stuff, and especially, this is silly, these slip cases, these O cards, whatever you want to call them, once these sell out, they go for insane prices. So if you want it, if you're like me and you just want to enjoy these things and not see them as an investment, you probably should buy it sooner than later. So I'm glad we could have this talk about the monster of Camp Sunshine on Blu-ray from Something Weird and AGFA, or on Blu-ray from AGFA and Something Weird.